guys, so in this video I'm going to be discussing modes derived from the melodic minor scale. Essentially what they are, how to build them, what the associated chords are, and how to use them. Now, a mode is essentially just a new scale that you create from an existing scale by choosing a different root note. So instead of having C major, you play the C major scale but starting and ending on the D, for example, and that gives you D Dorian mode. Now, most of us are familiar with the modes derived from a major scale, that is the Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian modes. But you can actually derive modes from any pre-existing scale, whether that's the harmonic minor scale or the pentatonic scale, or in this case, a melodic minor scale. And so modes and chords derived from the melodic minor scale are found quite a lot in jazz, so they're a useful thing to know. Now, before we begin, I should say that in the classical world, or in classical theory, if I were to play the C melodic minor scale, it would look like this going up. So just the C major scale, but with a flattened third. And then when you go back down, you would play the C natural minor scale, which is just a mode of the major scale. So while that's the melodic minor in sort of the classical world, in the jazz world, we only ever play the ascending version of the melodic minor scale. So it's the same going up as it is going down, and it looks like this. Right, again, it's just the C major scale with a flattened third. And that's called either the real melodic minor scale, or the jazz melodic minor, or the real jazz melodic minor scale. Doesn't really matter what it's called, just know from now on when I'm referring to the melodic minor scale, I mean the jazz melodic minor scale, which is the same up as it is down. Now, songs are generally not written in melodic minor keys. If they were, you'd get some pretty weird key signatures. Like, for example, the G melodic minor key would have a B flat and an F sharp, which would be a bit of a weird key signature. Instead, songs are generally written in a major or a natural minor key, but you can still play chords and scales derived from the melodic minor key and substitute them into the song that you're playing. Now, I've got a separate video where I explain in detail the difference between playing in a key and playing from a key, so go check that out if this doesn't make sense or if you're interested. But I also will go through an example at the end of this video which hopefully will make this a little bit clearer. Now, I'm also going to ask you to be a little bit flexible and open-minded with what I'm about to explain here, because the way we build modes and chords derived from the melodic minor scale in theory is actually a little bit different to how they're generally used in practice. And in this video, I'm going to explain both the theory and what's actually done in practice. So anyway, let's begin. So let's take the C melodic minor scale. So it looks like this. And again, that's just the C major scale with a flattened third. And the first mode of the C melodic minor scale is, of course, the C melodic minor scale, starting and ending on the C. Now, if we start at the root note and we build a chord by going up in thirds, we get C, E flat, G, B. So this is a chord that has a flat minor third and a major seventh, which gives you a C minor major 7 chord. Now, this is a chord that's not found in major scale harmony. That is, you're never going to find the C minor major 7 chord in any major key. So this is a sound which is really only found in the melodic minor scale, although you can also find it in the harmonic minor scale, which I'll make a separate video on. And so if you're playing a song and you find the chord C minor major 7, you can play the C melodic minor over it. And it fits nicely. And the only other thing I want to say here is that the C minor major 7 chord, when you're using a C melodic minor scale over the top, doesn't have any avoid notes. Now, if you don't know what avoid notes are, again, I've got a separate video on avoid notes explaining sort of what they are. But in short, an avoid note is just a note that is a flat ninth interval above a chord tone, above a note that is in the chord. The C melodic minor scale does not have any notes that are a flat ninth above one of the notes in the C minor major 7 chord. And so there are no avoid notes over the C minor major 7 chord. Now the second mode of the C melodic minor scale looks like this. Right, so it's the C melodic minor starting and ending on the D. Now, if we build up the associated chord, so we start on the root note, on the D, and we go up in thirds, we find that we get a D minor 7. If we go up one more note, we find that we have a D minor 7 flat 9. Now, while this chord exists in theory, it's never really played in practice because it's believed that the flat 9 in this chord, the flat 9 interval, above the root, ruins the quality of the D minor 7 chord. So you'd never really, in practice, in reality, find a D minor 7 flat 9 chord. Instead, what you would play is a D sus flat 9 chord. And essentially all that means is instead of the 3, you play the 4. Now this is actually what's called a Phrygian chord, and I've got a whole separate video explaining what Phrygian chords are in detail, so I'm not going to go into it here. But essentially all I want to say is that a Phrygian chord acts as a substitute for a dominant chord, so this is in effect a substitute for a D7 chord. And I also want to say that the D sus flat 9 chord, when you're using the second mode of the C melodic minor scale over the top, also, like the first chord, doesn't have any avoid notes. Now the third mode of the C melodic minor scale looks like this. Right, so it's the C melodic minor starting and ending on the E flat. Now again, let's build up the associated chord. We start on the E flat, go up a third to the G, go up a third to the B, and then a third to the D. So that gives us an E flat major 7 sharp 5 chord. So again, if you're playing a song and you see the E flat 7 sharp 5 chord, you can use the C melodic minor scale, or rather the third mode of the C melodic minor scale, to improvise over the top of it. Now this is called a C Lydian Augmented mode because it's got a sharp 4, which makes it a Lydian mode, and it's also got a sharp 5, which makes it augmented. Now if we take a look at this chord, you'll notice that the C in the scale C melodic minor is a flat ninth above the sharp 5, above the B. So technically, in theory, that C should be an avoid note. However, because this is an augmented chord, that is, it's got the sharp 5, it's already quite a dissonant sound. And so it's generally accepted or generally agreed that this C is not actually an avoid note. It doesn't sound like an avoid note, it doesn't sound wrong or unpleasant. So for the sake of this video, you'll just have to indulge me and just accept that the C is not considered an avoid note. Now the fourth mode of C melodic minor looks like this. Right, so it starts and finishes on the F, and again it's got that one E flat. And again, if we build up the chords starting on the F, we get F, A, C, E flat. So that gives us an F7. If we keep going up, we get the G, and then the B. So rather than a B flat, we have a B. So we have a F7 sharp 11 chord. So again, if you're playing a piece of music, you see an F7 sharp 11, you know that you can play the C melodic minor over the top. And the fourth mode of the melodic minor scale is called the Lydian Dominant mode because it's got that sharp 4, so it's a Lydian, but it's a dominant because it's got a flat 7. Now the fifth mode of C melodic minor looks like this. Right, Right, starting and ending on the G. Again, if we build that up, it looks like we have a G7 chord. And if you keep going, we have a G7 flat 13 chord with the E flat. Now, again, this chord exists in theory, but it's never really used in practice. And in fact, the fifth mode of the melodic minor scale is very, very rarely used in practice. You'll only very rarely hear it used anywhere in any kind of song or improvisation that you listen to. Generally, if you're playing a song and you see G7 flat 13, you would play either the altered scale, which I'll cover later in this video, or the whole tone scale, which I'll cover in a different video. And the reason is this particular G7 flat 13 that's derived from the fifth mode of the C melodic minor scale has obviously the flat 13, but it also has a natural 11, which is a void note, the C, and it's an extension that's never really used over a dominant chord. You can see G7 sharp 11s, but you never see G7 11s because it's considered, again, to be a bit dissonant and unpleasant. It's also got a natural 9, which by itself is okay to play over a G7, but because you're flattening the 13, you're already creating a lot of dissonance, so you might as well go all the way and either play a flat 9 and a sharp 9 and just create as much dissonance as possible. And that's in effect what the altered scale does, and again I'll cover that in a little while. So while this G7 flat 13 chord exists in theory, in practice you only really ever see the fifth mode of the melodic minor scale being used over a tonic chord, that is over a C minor major 7 with a G in the bass. And because you're playing a C minor major 7 just with the fifth in the bass, and you're playing the C melodic minor just starting and ending on the fifth on the G, it's more or less the same as the first mode. And so effectively the fifth mode and the first mode of the C melodic minor is the exact same thing, and as I said, it's generally just not really seen in practice. The sixth mode of the C melodic minor scale looks like this. So again, if we build that up starting on the root, we get A, C, E flat, G. Now that's a half diminished or A minor 7 flat 5 chord. And so again, if you see an A half diminished chord in a chord progression, that means you can use the C melodic minor over the top to improvise or write a melody or whatever. And again, this chord has no avoid notes. Now the seventh and final mode of the C melodic minor scale looks like this. Right, so again it's the C melodic minor starting and ending on the B. And so let's build the associated chord. Again, we start on the B and we go up in thirds. And we find a B minor 7 flat 5 or a B half diminished chord. Now again, this is one of those things that while this is correct in theory, in practice you would never really play the C melodic minor scale over a B half diminished chord. Instead, when we build a chord off the seventh mode of a melodic minor scale, we would play the root, the fourth, and then the seventh. Now notice that the fourth is actually a flat fourth and therefore a major third. So in effect we've got the root, a major third, and a flat 7, which makes it a B7 chord. So in practice we use the seventh mode of a melodic minor scale to improvise or play over a dominant chord. And this mode is called the altered mode, and it is used a lot in jazz, so it's worth taking a little bit of a closer look at it. Now instead of playing the B altered mode, let's play the C altered mode, which is in the key of D flat minor, just because it's a little bit easier to analyze. Now the reason it's called an altered scale or an altered mode is because every single note that can be altered is altered. So if you were to play a C7, you have to play the C, the root note, because that establishes the tonality. If you play it from the B, you play a B7. For it to be a C7, the root has to be a C. And you also have to play the third and the seventh, that is, the guide tones, because that establishes the quality of the chord, whether it's a major 7, a minor 7, or in this case, a dominant 7 with a major third and a flat 7th. Now, every single other note is not important to the quality or the tonality of this chord. Now, at its simplest, the C7 chord is in the key of F major, right? Just the one B flat. So you would play C Mixolydian mode. And so the C7 alt mode, as I said, changes every single note that can be changed. So you have the root, which can't be altered, a flat 9 and a sharp 9, a 3 which can't be altered, a sharp 11, a flat 13, and a flat 7, which again can't be altered. So these three notes make it a C7, and notice that the scale doesn't include a natural 5, but that's okay because the natural 5, the perfect fifth above the G, doesn't actually add anything to the tonality or to the quality of the chord, so you can alter it. And so that's what I mean when I say that every single chord that can be altered is altered. Instead of playing the natural 9, we play both a flat 9 and a sharp 9. Instead of playing the natural 11, you play a sharp 11, and you can't play a flat 11th because that's the same as the major third. Instead of playing a natural 13, we play a flat 13, and you can't play a sharp 13 because that's the same as the flat 7. So this scale is literally altered in every single way that it can be altered while still keeping it as a C7 chord. And so if you were to build up the chord associated with the C altered scale, you would get a C7, flat 9, sharp 11, flat 13. Right now, that's quite a mouthful, or a handful in this case. And so generally, not every single one of those extensions is played. Instead, you can play any one or any combination of those extensions. But a good proxy chord for when you see a C7 alt written down somewhere is a sharp 9, flat 11 chord. That way it's not too busy, you don't have too many notes, so it's not too sort of muddy and packed, but you still get that really altered sound because you have a sharp 9 and a flat 13. And because the C7 alt chord has every single alteration that is possible, it's more or less the most dissonant chord you can play in sort of standard music theory. And because it's already so dissonant, it also doesn't have any avoid notes. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, even though a chord progression can be in a particular key, you can still use scales and chords from a different key. So if, for example, you're playing a song or you're playing a chord progression and you come across a dominant chord, so you come across, for example, a C7. Now, generally you would use the C Mixolydian mode or the F major scale to improvise over the top. However, if you want your improvisation to sound a little bit more jazzy and a little bit more harmonically complex, instead of playing the C Mixolydian mode, you can play some of the dominant 7 modes that we derived from the melodic minor scale, that being the Lydian Dominant mode and the altered mode. Now these give you a bit more of a sort of a jazzy and bit more sort of out there sound, but they're perfectly fine to use over a dominant chord because they've got that major third and minor 7th. Now you can also try using the 5th mode of the melodic minor scale if you like, but as I said, that mode is generally pretty rarely used in practice. And if you happen to find a Phrygian chord or a sus flat 9 chord, you can use the 2nd mode of the melodic minor scale. The only reason I've included it up here is because it's a substitute for a dominant chord. Similarly, if you're playing a song and you come across a half-diminished chord, say C half-diminished, you can play the Locrian mode, which is derived from D flat major, or you can play the half-diminished mode, which is the 6th mode of the melodic minor scale, which is actually in E flat melodic minor. And so if you have a look in the picture-in-picture, you'll notice that the only difference is that the Locrian mode has a D flat, which sounds a little bit like an avoid note, whereas the half-diminished mode has a D. But again, you can use either one of those scales. Or again, if you're playing a song and you come across a major 7 chord, say C major 7, you can play the C Ionian mode, or C major. You can play C Lydian mode, which is G major, which again is a scale derived from the major scale harmony. Or you can play the C Lydian Augmented mode, which is the 3rd mode of the melodic minor scale, and in this case the A melodic minor scale. And all of those are perfectly fine. And so using these ideas, you can make an improvisation sound a lot more jazzy and a lot more sort of harmonically interesting and complex. So for example, if we take a really simple chord progression like B half diminished to G7 to C major 7. All of those chords are in the key of C major, so you can technically improvise over that entire little chord progression using the scale of C major. However, that sounded a little bit boring and a little bit simple. So instead of that, over that same chord progression, you can substitute in modes derived from the melodic minor scale. So for example, over the B half diminished, you can use the B half diminished mode, which is derived from the D melodic minor. Over the G7, you can use the G altered mode, which is derived from the A flat melodic minor. And over the C major 7, you can use the C Lydian Augmented mode, which is derived from the A melodic minor. So then you'd have something like this. Right, so already that sounds a little bit more jazzy, a little bit more complex. So in the same way that you can substitute in modes derived from the melodic minor scale into a given chord progression, you can also substitute in chords derived from the melodic minor scale into a given chord progression or song. So to give you an example of how this is done, let's take the song Summertime. Now first let's play it just with the standard chords, the sort of really basic absolute skeleton chords. If we do that, it sounds like this. So that entire song was largely in the key of A natural minor, with a couple sort of jumps to A harmonic minor, but it's all written out here in the picture-in-picture. So now let's play that same song, that same melody, but substitute in chords derived from melodic minor scales. Now, so I substituted every single chord in Summertime for a chord that can be derived from a melodic minor scale. Now that's probably overdoing it a bit, and you wouldn't normally do that in sort of practice or when you're performing. Instead, you'd sort of substitute a chord here and a chord there and leave the other chords untouched. And that sort of gives you a much more interesting harmony rather than playing the entire song in the key of a harmonic minor or the entire song in melodic minor keys, various granted, but they're all sort of derived from melodic minor scales. Instead, you'd substitute sort of one chord and then leave the others untouched so that you're playing a chord derived from the melodic minor scale, but then a chord derived from a major scale. And that gives you a lot more sort of variation and a lot more interest. Now, the only other thing you need to be careful of is that when you're changing chords, be mindful of what the melody note is, because you don't want to change a chord tone if the melody is playing that chord tone that you're changing. Like, for example, in Summertime, when it goes to bar 13 and to the C major 7, the melody actually goes. Right, so over the C major 7, it goes E, G, E. So you're playing the natural 5 there. But what I did when I was substituting in chords from melodic minor scales was I played a sharp 5. Now, if you play a C major 7 sharp 5, but the melody is playing the natural 5, it can sound okay, but it can also be a bit sort of clashy. It could sound a bit unpleasant and dissonant. So what I did with the melody when I was playing the substituted chords was instead of playing the natural 5, I played the sharp 5. And so that changes the melody you're playing, yes, fine, but at least it doesn't clash with the chord you're playing in your left hand.